All right, so we've already started to get into this topic, but if we want to have a systematic overview of what self-love is, what it isn't, and how we can go on this journey of becoming more truly self-loving individuals, we need to talk about and understand the obstacles to self-love, specifically the obstacles to getting out of the rutted pathways we've been in. And I should say that I'm just listing out these obstacles. This is not a full exploration of how we divest ourselves from these obstacles, how we negotiate them. I think there's a lot of value just in pointing them out and letting you kind of marinate with that, see how that resonates for you, because one or two of these might really tap you on the shoulder and go, hey, this is really something we should look at and reflect on in our own lives right now. So the first one on the list is obviously dogma and religious upbringing. And what we want to do is what I think every human being, it is their duty to do this, right? To sit down and say, okay, here's what Pastor so-and-so told me to believe. Here's what this influential Christian author told me to believe. Here's what my parents told me to believe. And it's a normal feature in adolescence specifically to start to notice inconsistencies within whatever framework you're being handed. It could be, here's how we water the cattle each springtime, right? If grandpa and dad and auntie told you three different versions of how we water the cattle in springtime, it is your job as a developing adolescent to go, hang on, I'm getting inconsistent information about how I'm being acculturated, and it is in my best interest, and it's actually in everybody's best interest, for me to iron out those inconsistencies, because sometimes they're just seeming inconsistencies. And by trying to investigate it, an adolescent learns the deeper truth. They come to a deeper understanding of what's important for their survival and their well-being. Other times they find out, oh, this person's right and those other people are wrong. And because I figured that out for myself, I now have a personal investment in this idea, which makes it useful. We all know that you can be taught something, right? Anybody who's ever tried to read a book about anything worthwhile, you can interact with deep transformative truths and kind of see absolutely nothing happen. Why? Because none of it's been brought home to you. So questioning your dogma and religious upbringing is not actually something you do in bad faith at all. It is your duty as a religious person to question the inconsistencies that you're presented with. Why? Because it will make you better. It will help you actually transform in the light of the truths that you are organizing, that you are assembling, that you are learning from. And one of the biggest things we need to do is trade out all that boatload of dogma, right? Which is just believe this because I said so, basically, to trade that out for an understanding based in values, right? What do I value? Now, this is where the humanists and the deeply religious people might conflict. And there's a voice in your head that says, well, if I operate just on my values instead of the values that were given to me by my religion, well, then I am going to become this evil person because I'll just be able to do whatever I want whenever I want to. And the question is, well, do you value being able to do whatever you want whenever you want? Because you probably don't. You really don't. Very few people do. If you think and you're like, well, I could just sit around and do nothing all day. I could just quit my job and just sit around smoking cigarettes and stealing and all those things. It's like, okay, yeah, you're totally free to do that. If you were totally free to do that, would you? Is that really how you'd want to spend your life? Would you get great satisfaction out of living just in compulsive pleasure seeking alone? Would you prioritize that if you were really given the option? Would you go around stealing from other people, taking what isn't yours? Would you really do that? Because for most people, if that is the alternative, then please stay with your religious dogma, because it's probably better that way. But chances are, you listening to this, anybody who's coming to this topic of healing, right, wanting to be better, wanting to have a life that's more harmonious, you are the type of person who in yourself values giving more than taking, in yourself values other people and sees a great inherent worth in them that needs to be protected and, if anything, built up, not taken from. So you want to start realizing that, okay, I'm not doing X, Y, or Z because my pastor told me, or because a book told me to do it, or scripture told me to do it. I'm doing it because I value goodness and no one needs to tell me to do it. And if you don't bridge that gap, then you are in so many ways psychologically still going to function like a child. Part of moving from psychological immaturity to full psychological development is taking dogma that you've been given, the parenting you've been given, and start to decide for yourself what you truly believe and which values are going to act as your compass as you move through this, very not black and white world where you're going to have to make value judgments. It's going to have to be in the gray a lot of the time. And the way you do that as a reflection of who you really are is by understanding what you value and prioritizing that above dogma. So the second big obstacle to self-love is what I call patterning and avoidance. We have associated self-love in many ways with the behavior and attitudes of people who are, quite frankly, assholes, right? We have this cultural apparatus that helps us get to this belief or this understanding of things, that anybody who doesn't actively hate themselves is some kind of, malignant narcissist, right? But also, if you grew up in a household where there was a lot of neglect or abuse, chances are there were some personalities in that household who put themselves above other people and also who vehemently punished you when you attempted to love yourself. And so, in so many ways, you were taught through punishment or through modeling that loving yourself isn't allowed, or it's a disgusting thing that leads to becoming a truly terrible person. And neither of those things are true. The classic issue here is not wanting to be like the narcissistic or sociopathic parent who raised you. So number three is cognitive bias of responsibility and or service, right? So this is a cognitive bias. This is a mental trap we fall into when we are not thinking critically and we are motivated by our own values or those transmitted to us through dogma. So for instance, classic example, overworked mom has three kids and she always avoids going to the gym because, oh, so and so has got to get to swimming practice, and oh, I've got to take care of this errand and that errand, and getting to the gym always goes to the bottom of the list. The belief is that taking time for this mom's well-being would take from the people she cares for and would make her not as good of a mom. Not sure if the grammar there is right, but you get it. And this is a total cognitive trap, right? This is a cognitive bias where we devalue things that care for us and that help us maintain our essential well-being in the misapprehension that this is somehow giving more to others, and it's not. So you have this upside down pyramid, and everything in your life is up here in the bigger part of the pyramid, and you're down here supporting it all. But your sleep is least important, your time is least important, where you spend your money, you can't spend it on yourself, you can't spend it on things that would actually promote your well-being. And you end up deprioritizing the way you spend your time and money in such a way that there is no one in your life contributing more to the degradation of your mind, spirit, and body than you, and your complete lack of ability to prioritize it in your schedule or in your finances. So this is a revolution for most people. Gee, I'm going to spend a little bit of money on myself, on my growth, on my healing, versus on just basic like groceries. Because most of the time we're saying like, oh, I can't afford to do this, that, or the other thing for myself because it doesn't fit in the budget. There's no room in the budget right now. Well, guess what? Your budget is full of things that rank from literally keeping people alive in your household, but past the first few things on that list, the level of importance starts to dwindle massively to the point where you end up getting down to the bottom of the list and you're like, oh, I am sacrificing my well being in this list of priorities for things that are stupid, for lack of a better word, for things that are maybe useful, but in no way more important than your well being. Let's say my example there is kitty litter. If you have a cat, you want to buy kitty litter, right? Because the alternative is not great. However, if it came down to one or the other, it's always smarter to choose your well being over everyday essentials. Why? Because your well being is going to do more for you than anything exterior could, especially something of small importance. Because everything in your life, the truth is, everything in that pyramid, in reality, everything goes downhill, right? Your ability to serve everything in that pyramid comes from how much you're able to cultivate your well being. That means that you need to get the pyramid from totally 180 degrees wrong all the way to you are at the pinnacle. Why? Because only from that place, only if you are well, and let's face it, alive, are you going to be able to meet your responsibilities. Only from a place of healing are you going to be able to serve the people who you want to serve from your fullest rather than from your lack. Obstacle number 4 is the addiction to earning love. When we grow up in environments where love is not given to us or where it's very conditional, we end up psychologically becoming obsessed with trying to earn love, trying to win it, trying to achieve it in many different ways. Now, this is inherently flawed because love, it turns out, is available to us through means that are unconditional. But so much of us spend our entire lives shaping identities and personalities around the things we do to earn love. And all of these things require massive effort, so much so that they can help distract away from the unredeemed places, the places where we are empty and in great pain. And we will lean into these methods of earning love that much more because they also act as methods of distraction. And if you are by nature a competitive person, or by nature a kind of person who is willing to work hard for things, this can really ratchet that up in unhealthy ways. And this is one of the hardest things about learning to cultivate self-love, is actively spotting the places where you're reflexively, reactively trying to earn it, falling back into your old ways of trying to win and control and wrestle love into your life and wrestle it to the ground and somehow shackle it to a place where it can't run. Like, it's a lot of work, and it will completely suck up every bit of oxygen in your life if you let it. And a lot of embracing the power of love is not in becoming more powerful, but in letting go of the things that are stealing the power. In this case, the addiction to earning it. You cannot embrace unconditional love if you're also trying to earn it. It's a contradiction in terms. Number 5, self-hatred. That old chestnut, right? This is inherently linked to these other topics as well. In self-hatred, we learn to hate what is lovable and we learn to hate what is unlovable. And both of these are problems for our healing. So, what's an example of learning to hate what is lovable? If you in childhood learned that certain traits got you punished, like let's say creativity or expressions of emotion, crying, right? Then you would believe that these essential parts of being human are bad and therefore you ought to hate them. But through, even a moderate self-reflection, you could identify that, oh no, that was wrong for me to be punished or feel punished for something that was just part of being human. That was really the fault of whoever was my role model or caretaker at that time. Some things are less obvious. For instance, the ways that you actively try to burn your life to the ground. These are the compulsions that create the greatest risks to our life and health. One of the places on the path to self-love that has swallowed up more people than anything else is the part where they're asked to love not just the parts of them that are lovable, but the parts that are unlovable, the parts that they fear and hate the most. You know, that hardworking mom who's trying to take care of all her kids and deal with work, all that stuff at the same time. If she's got that upside down pyramid working in her life, well, she has choked off her own well-being in a number of different ways, and she is going to try to fill the ensuing void with something. Quite often food, because food usually starts its relationship in our lives well before any other substances of abuse. So in the panoply of things humans can consume to try to fill the inner void, the things we can do, whether it's, work, sex, drugs, rock and roll music, no, cigarettes, nicotine, chemicals, right? The first thing people have access to is food. And that's one of the first places where they can use their access to food and their consumption of food as a way to give themselves comfort, or at least tell themselves a story that they're being comforted in places where they are not having their needs met fully, or they're actively being abused in childhood. So this is why talking about emotional eating is such an across the board big issue, because it's a compulsion that's kind of at the root of a lot of other compulsions. Even people who, let's say the example of somebody who takes up smoking when they're a teenager. Well, smoking is going to lessen your hunger cravings, and so it can kind of take over for food at some point. But still, that compulsion to smoke, the compulsion to find an external solution, chemically or otherwise, to internal voids, that started with the relationship to food. We just sort of passed the baton to cigarettes at some point. And there are many people who maintain their emotional eating all throughout life while they're sort of adding on other compulsions as well. And so the big takeaway here is that you will not find that transformative self-love until you learn to love the things inside of you that you hate the most. And this is why we have to understand also that attempts at self-control tend to worsen the divide inside of us. They tend to pour gasoline on the inner conflict rather than put it out. And oftentimes when control mechanisms work, like let's say I'm going to try to just knuckle down and not eat bad things anymore, the relief you feel is not so much, wow, I really love the way I'm living so much more. There's this reprieve from the deep sense of shame and self-hatred that has been pounding you for decades. And that's not healthy, right? There's a much healthier way to connect with living free of compulsions, free from your addictions. Living a highly compulsive life it's terrible. It's really a terrible way to live. And when you get free of it, truly free of it, and you experience that freedom, you're not going to want to go back. I mean, certainly we can backslide, but the solution to any backsliding is more fully appreciating how awesome life is free of compulsive living. And if you ask yourself, well, if I'm not trying to control myself, how on earth am I ever going to stop these things? Well, this just kind of speaks to the last obstacle here, which is your complete distrust of yourself. The psychological schism that is created through deep mental illness and or trauma leaves different psychological bodies inside of our brains, different psychological entities. You can think of them as programs if you want. And the conflict happens when something in our external environment pops up and both entities jump into action, right? So this could be the entity that's let's just paint sort of a cartoonishly simple version so you can understand the concept here. Let's say there's true self and survival self, right? The part of you that learned to eat your way through your problems in childhood. And something happens at work, you're really stressed out. True self says, hey, no amount of cookies is really gonna improve our lives here. Let's find other ways of caring for ourselves and managing our stress. Survival self jumps up and says, let's eat our way through this problem. And for many reasons, which I won't get into here, there's no amount of self-control that can change that. And because we have these divergent wills inside of us, we begin to distrust our inner world. We begin to distrust any signal we get from the inside because we can't tell if this is the voice of God or the voice of the devil. And the more that we view things that way, as there are forces inside of us and some are good and some are bad, the more that dogmatic black and white thinking deepens the divide. And this divide will only end when we start to realize that everything inside of us is working for our benefit. Some of it is just more grounded in reality, and some of it is more grounded in stories that we've been telling ourselves that were largely written by trauma and the ways we learn to survive the aftermath. And a big part of healing is learning to heal that divide, both by deconstructing the structures of survival that make up those psychological entities that get us to try to eat enough cookies to solve our problems. But then also we have to actively heal the divide. We have to bring these things back together, and that is going to be an act of self-love. It's going to be difficult. It's going to feel too hard, but you're going to do it. And when you do, you will encounter a sense of self, and you will get back so much energy and power. You'll be amazed that you ever lived any other way. Self-love will help us pick apart the structures of survival, right? These things in our brains that were built from a young age to try to keep us safe, but they're not actually keeping us safe. They're keeping us stuck. In a lot of ways, they're actively killing us. They're eroding our sense of well-being every day. These are the things that are keeping the inverted pyramid, weighing us down, driving us into the ground, right? And as we pick these structures apart, it becomes easier to go back and reevaluate and renegotiate our relationship to all of the obstacles that I mentioned before. It's an iterative process, right? We come back, we think about the places where we hate ourselves. We notice more about it, right? We notice the emotions there that we're scared to feel. And then through presence and things like our values and a variety of other mechanisms, which we can talk about later. It's really important, but I've already gone on for like an hour here. Ultimately, the more self-love you can allow, the more self-love you can recruit, cultivate, beg, steal, or borrow. No matter how you increase the amount of self-love you're working with, it's going to help you extinguish anxiety, to be that loving presence that extinguishes, that short circuits all of these survival mechanisms. Why? Because the survival mechanisms are all just different ways of trying to find in the exterior the solution to our inner context of abject fear, terror, not feeling seen, and not feeling loved. When you don't have to look outside of yourself for the answers to those questions, how can I be safe? How can I be seen? How can I be loved? You will undo the fruitless searching that all got kicked off by your traumatic experiences. You will become a space that holds the wounds and allows them finally to heal. So that's all for today. If you have any questions, I would love to interact with you in the comments. If you are interested in coaching, let me know. You can email me, john@oaksweightloss.com. That's OAKES. I'll have my email in the, the description below the video. If you found value in this video, please like, share, comment for the algorithm. This is a new channel. I really need your help getting it off the ground. Talk to you soon.